We are sitting near an artwork called Kent State by the British artist Richard Hamilton. This is a part of a series of Vietnam-era artworks that joined the film as a part of the exhibition Current Themes at the Webster Center for the Arts at OSU. In an interview before he passed away, Hamilton said that this photo was of you. As a result of that interview, this print, which is in the collection of many museums, is identified as being you. When did you and the artist Naeem Mohaiemen discuss this, and how were you able to confirm that this was in fact not you? Could you share details about the photograph that you know is of you?
Yes, I think Naeem and I talked about this at Kent on the weekend of May 1 through 4. And I looked at that and I said, that is not me. And he said, why? I said, well, I was never on my back and I was on my stomach. And that appears to be on some sort of hard surface, blacktop or concrete. I was on grass. I was on the edge of the practice football field. And so any picture I've seen of me, there's people close around me. And there's always somebody kneeling beside me, giving me comfort, because I wasn't bleeding externally, I was bleeding internally. I was alive and awake and alert and talking to people. Also, I had an extensive background in first aid through my Boy Scout training, and I knew I had a spinal cord injury. I knew I wasn't to be moved any time until somebody properly knew how to move me. And so I stayed still. And I remember turning my head and looking up and see the look of fright and terror on the students who were looking down on me of what they had just witnessed. And I was part of that terror that they had witnessed. And that's how I know that it's not me, because I'm not on my stomach and I'm not on hard surface the way that photograph looks. So my only guess is that might be John Cleary right before they picked him up to move him, who died. No, he didn't die, he was wounded. He was near the big sculpture that's right beside Taylor Hall. And so that's how I know that it's not me, because, you know, I never had my shirt open, never had my jacket open. And in fact, both my shirts and my jacket are on display at Kent State University in the May 4th Visitor Center at this point in time. They've done an exhibition about me being shot at Kent State. So.
And then can you talk about the photograph that you know is of you that has been shared, or any photographs such as that?
Yeah, only photographs I've seen of me are usually of the wide angle of Jeffrey Miller with Mary Vecchio leaning over him in that they call Madonna pose. The wide shot shows in the background, if you're looking at it, just to the right on the grass, right side of a little road, there's a group of people forming around somebody. And that's me lying on the grass right there. I was 97 yards away, nearly 100 yards away from the Ohio National Guard at the time of the shooting. And I mean, when I go to that spot, there's a marker, it's about this big around, for each of the wounded students. And it tells the distance. And when I'm looking up there, all the trees now are mature. Many of them are very small trees. So there's not much of a clear line of sight. But back then there was a clear line of sight from the National Guard to myself. And I remember being shot at and lying there thinking, okay, they're shooting. And I was thankful that I didn't hear any bullets hitting around me. Then all of a sudden, in that 13-second period, towards the end, the last 5 or 4 seconds, I heard bullets hitting the ground immediately around me. I said, oh my God, they're shooting at me. The next thing I know, I had this bee sting, and my legs got real tight, and then they relaxed, just like 2 weeks earlier when I had Pith the frog in zoology class. You run that down the spinal column of a frog and the legs go tight and then relax. I felt that feeling, and I knew immediately that I had a spinal cord injury. And I checked to see if I was bleeding anywhere, and I wasn't bleeding externally, I was bleeding internally. So I knew I was starting to fill up with blood. My breathing was starting to become labored. And then a student from the Black United students at Kent came over to me with his suit, tie, and his briefcase and asked me, you okay? And I said, no, I got shot. He said, do you know your parents' phone numbers? So he took down their phone numbers, went into Prentice Hall, which is right beside where we got shot, and called my parents. So they didn't have to hear about a shooting at Kent and wonder if their son was alive or dead or what. So that's part of the scenario. And then all of a sudden they came and picked me up and drove me to Robinson Memorial Hospital in Ravenna. And the next thing I know, I woke up 5 or 6 days later with all these tubes stuck in me, down my nose, down my throat, and my chest. I hurt like crazy. They broke 3 ribs. They manhandled all my organs, took out one of my lungs, one lobe of my left lung. And then I started my recovery, but it took 3 weeks before I was out of any real pain. Then I went to rehab, and then there was even more pain because they weaned me off of the morphine that I was on for 3 weeks. So went through withdrawal. Was not pleasant. That was a little more than you asked for, but
we will certainly contact the estate of Richard Hamilton and point out this error and how to correct it. But still, do you have any further thoughts about this historical mistake and what it may tell us about the haziness of memory, which is also the subject of Naeem's film?
Let's start with Naeem's film. Basically, it's a long newsreel of the events that happened from the late 50s all the way up through, more recent times. And it's not pretty. Politicians who get public disagreement from large portions of the population don't react very politely or properly. They get angry because they hold their beliefs very strong, and they tie themselves to the propaganda that they're spewing. And we had the propaganda from Richard Nixon and Spiro Agnew and other politicians of the era who thought that they should have shot more students. We also had a population in Ohio that thought they should have shot more students. And my parents got hate mail. I received hate mail. First piece of mail I opened up after being shot and being conscious finally was, "Dear communist hippie radical, I hope by the time you read this you are dead." I wouldn't say it was a lot. It was probably 10% of the 500 or 600 cards and letters that I got, but that's still a lot of hate coming at me. And first part of that question was in relation to now. Is that what your question was?
Relation to memory?
Oh, relation to memories, yeah. Yeah, a lot of my memory of that area is a little hazy, but when I see films like this, and I've started to see many more of them as I'm getting older, because people are realizing we're 50 plus years away, and they're documenting, collecting that era of documentation, putting it in places where it's easier to watch. And as soon as I see them, I remember, the shootings in Jackson State. I remember, the bus boycotts in 1954. And I remember the crossing of the bridge in Selma, Alabama, and the marches, and the March on Washington. And, I was in Washington, D.C. During the Poor People's March and spent walking through there. And so, I remember all those things. And the historian in the group of us who were wounded is Tom Grace. He's written about that whole era of student protest and Kent State. And he told me a couple of weeks ago, he said, "You have the most consistent recollection about what has happened to us, of any of us. Your stories has not changed in 56 years. You have a very clear memory of what happened to you." And I'm fortunate that I have that, and I haven't had it changed or influenced by the events around me. And I think probably because I've had to recount it so many times in the last 56 years. I've been to junior high schools, elementary schools, high schools, college campuses, vocational schools, trade schools, veterans groups. Excuse me. Rotary clubs, Lions clubs, all those fraternal organizations, and even women's organizations I've been to, plus churches. I've been to many different denominations. I also spoke to the National Council of Churches one time about this whole issue. And so, you know, I've done a lot of reading about it. You know, some of the three best books I've ever read about it was The Truth About Kent State by Peter Davies, Four Dead in Ohio by William Gordon, and the third one is it's an era book, and I can't remember the name of it, but it's what they call it. It's not a comic book, but where they use comic book format, graphic novel. Yes, I forget the guy's name, but that's an excellent rendition of the era and a Kent State as well. And you know, they're all telling basically the same story. The one that's done the most research was Bill Gordon, who's a Kent State grad, and his is The Truth About Kent State. Four Dead in Ohio, excuse me, Four Dead in Ohio. So I recommend people to read those and to help put everything in perspective. Those three books are very good in that sense of the word in relation to applying it to today's history lessons that we see the abuse of power, the abuse of hate speech and hate language, and the condemning and the othering of people. We didn't use the word othering back then, but we do today. And you know, that's important that we not allow those who accuse us of being other. Yes, we are other. We're the other of people who speak the truth. And if the truth hurts, then that's your problem. It's our problem to fight to bring the truth forward. And one of the ways I tell people to do that is to register to vote and vote. Study your issues. Be part of your community. All kinds of boards and commissions you can belong to help shape your community. It's real important to do that, and I've done that most of my life. So,
since you have like such photographic memory, do you think like memories are stronger than photographs? Because a lot of time we look at photographs and it's like an evidence of time.
Well, to me, photographs are nothing more than guideposts. You know, they're landmarks. And every time I see one, I remember what I was doing then, where I was. And even in the historical ones from the 60s. I grew up in a mixed marriage. My mother was Republican, my father was Democratic. So when you went to the dinner table, you better have something. We also read Time magazine, a Newsweek magazine, a Look magazine, a Life magazine coming into the house. Plus, we made sure we were done with dinner and have everything cleaned up so we could watch the 6 o'clock news when it was only 15 minutes, the national news. The rest of it was local news. Now we have a whole half hour of national news plus PBS NewsHour at the other end, plus the local news. And we had the Canton repository coming into the household. And so, you know, we were expected to read the newspaper. They were paying for it, so we should read it as well. So we had to keep up to date. And so memory to me are guideposts of historical events.
Even if it is not you in the photograph, Richard Hamilton said this about the work. It was too terrible an incident in American history to submit to any arty or artistic treatment. Yet there it was in my hand by chance. It seemed right too, that art could help to keep the shame in our minds. When you think about this, do you feel his work achieves this aim here and now in this exhibition? What do you think is the role of shame when it comes to remembering painful history? Do you think shame can lead to justice?
Well, I think it's important. Shame plays a big part in our American history. We've done some pretty shameful things in this United States, not only to those of us who are Anglo, ethnic, whatever, but just think of the shame we did upon the Native Americans, the shame that we've done to African Americans, the shame that we've done to the Chinese, shame that we did to anybody that looks different than Anglo-Saxon. So it's important that we have a reminder. Just think of the shame of the photographs from the Vietnam era that we grew up with, watching on TV. It was the first television war at that point in time because we had satellites and photographers and broadcasters could only broadcast at certain times of the day when the satellite was over them. They transmit it to the West Coast, and the West Coast then would record it and put it on the 6 o'clock news at night. So we were able to see our friends and relatives and brothers and neighbors who were fighting the war in Vietnam. And that was the shame that we had, that the war had no purpose, no real reason other than to stop the dominoes from falling, which was a false narrative that we had to deal with, that if one country fell, the whole Asia would fall to the communists, the Russians and the Chinese. And obviously that's not something that happened. And just think of the Americans and the locals and the natives in Vietnam and Cambodia and Laos and neighboring countries who all died from, and are still dying from, bombs that were left there and landmines and the results of Agent Orange in the fields and the rice paddies that are still purging that stuff out of them. You know, that's the shame. And it's important that we remember that shame. We just can't remember the glory of the victory of Gettysburg. We just can't remember the glory of the victory of winning World War II. You know, we got to remember how we got there. There was a lot of shame getting to those events. And if we don't remember that, we're doomed to repeat it. Hate to paraphrase off of some other historian.
Hamilton based his artwork on a photograph he took from a televised BBC news broadcast. What do you think about the way media shares images of violence around the world, back then and today?
Well, they were pretty raw back then, and they're still very raw. But what they're able to do now with production techniques and modern technology and cameras and filming, and with our growth and development of language, they can soften that blow so when you see it, it's not going to slap you in the face like we were dealt with in the 50s and the 60s with the civil rights movement and the Vietnam era. And so, yeah, it's part of what we're dealing with, and you know, I wish it was a little more raw. You know, we need to have the raw truth. The raw truth basically wakes you up, grabs you by the throat, and said, look, this is what's happening. We can't always sugarcoat it, and it should never be sugarcoated, because it's violence, it's murder, it's attempted murder.
One last question from me. Even though this photograph isn't entirely true, what does it speak about how people remember things?
Well, it's reminiscent of the photograph of John Cleary on the sidewalk, or right on the edge of the sidewalk at Taylor Hall with the big sculpture right beside him, and Joe Cullum and about 3 other gentlemen tending to his wounds where he got shot. And it's very vivid, just like this, because you see John laying on his back, and you can tell they're putting pressure on where his wounds are, trying to stop him from bleeding. Fortunately, he made it, he lived, but it's very reminiscent of the photographs I've seen of John Cleary on the ground being tended to by 3 to 4 other students who were there at the time. And so it gives you a bit of the raw emotion and the results that violence with guns can hurt you and kill you. And when you run a bullet through a body, you don't know what it's going to do to you until the surgeons get in there and follow the path and take out what they can and leave what they have to leave and sew you up so that you can live and put you on life support. I know my wounds, fortunate that the only real damage I had was through my lower lobe on my left lung. My diaphragm was damaged and my spinal cord was damaged. Those are the only organs, nothing that was going to kill me other than losing blood. And so, you know, it shows you the raw emotion of the people tending to the person who's lying there suffering on the ground with this abuse of power that was unleashed on unarmed college students who were just using their First Amendment right voice their opinion against government actions.